3 days after I inherited my uncle's ranch, a stranger walked onto my porch, looked me straight in the eyes, and told me I owed the HOA $120,000. No warning, no explanation, just a deadline and a threat to take my land. That's when I realized something very important. They didn't pick the wrong ranch. They picked the wrong owner. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet in the way only rural places ever are, the kind of quiet where birds make more noise than people, and time feels like it's moving at its own pace. The sun had just cleared the tree line, stretching long shadows across the gravel driveway. I stood on the porch holding a mug of black coffee, still steaming, still hot. And for the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I had only moved in 3 days earlier. 3 days. The house still smelled like my uncle. Old wood, dust, coffee brewed the same way for decades. Nothing fancy, nothing modern, just honest land that had existed long, before anyone thought to slap a logo on it and call it a community. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch. I looked up, expecting maybe a delivery driver or a curious neighbor. Instead, I saw a man I'd never seen before. Mid-50s, red-faced, golf shirt tucked too neatly into khaki pants that had no business being anywhere near a working ranch. He held a thick binder under his arm like it was a badge. He didn't say hello, didn't ask my name, didn't even ask if I was the owner. He flipped open the binder, scanned a page, then looked straight at me. "You're the new owner of this property, correct?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I inherited it from my uncle." That's when he dropped it. "Well then," he said, tapping the binder, "you've inherited his unpaid HOA dues as well. 12 years of back payments, penalties, and interest. Total comes to $120,000. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to accept what my ears had just heard. "I'm sorry," I said. "Did you just say HOA?" He nodded without hesitation. "Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. This ranch falls under our jurisdiction." That was the moment my coffee almost slipped out of my hand. My uncle never mentioned an HOA. Not once. And this was a man who would remind you if you owed him $20. I looked past the stranger, out over acres of open pasture, pine trees, a dirt road that hadn't been paved in my lifetime. No gates, no signs, no clubhouse, no manicured lawns, nothing that even remotely resembled an HOA. "I don't think this property is part of any association," I said carefully. His jaw tightened. "According to our records, it is. And if payment isn't received within 30 days, we'll be placing a lien on the property." There it was, the threat. He snapped the binder shut, handed me a single sheet of paper, turned around, and walked back toward a black SUV at the end of my driveway. On the door was a small decal I hadn't noticed before. Cedar Ridge HOA. He drove off without another word. I stood on that porch long after the engine noise disappeared. The paper trembled slightly in my hand. The morning was still beautiful. Birds still sang. The land hadn't changed. But something else had. At that moment, I didn't know who that man really was. I didn't know he was the president of the HOA. And I definitely didn't know how far they were willing to go. All I knew was this. Whatever he was trying to pull, it wasn't a mistake. And I wasn't about to hand over my uncle's land without a fight. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 34 years old. Until recently, my life was ordinary. I taught high school physics in Dallas, graded papers at night, drank my coffee too strong, complained about traffic like everyone else. I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. And I definitely wasn't looking for a fight over land. My uncle Raymond Brooks was my mother's older brother. He never married, never had kids, lived alone and preferred it that way. Not antisocial, just private. He believed a man didn't need much to be content, as long as he had land under his boots and quiet at the end of the day. When I was a kid, I spent summers with him. He taught me to ride a horse before I learned to drive, showed me how to mend fences, read weather, and tell when the creek would rise just by listening. He didn't give long speeches. He lived his lessons. That ranch was his life's work. He bought the land decades ago when no one wanted something so far from town. built the barn himself, dug fence posts by hand. Every board had a story, even if only he remembered it. Land doesn't belong to people, he used to say. You belong to it. You're just taking care of it while you're here. When he passed, I was stunned to learn he left the ranch to me. I quit my job, sold my condo, packed everything I owned into a truck, and drove north with my dog beside me. And now, 3 days in, an HOA won it all. Nothing about that ranch fit their claim. There were no notices, no meetings, no letters. And standing there holding that paper, one thought crept in that I couldn't shake. Maybe they weren't confused. Maybe they were waiting. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I drove into town to the HOA office. Glass building, polished floors, nothing older than 5 years. The man from my porch was already there. His name was Graham Holt. According to him, my uncle's land had been included in an expansion plan. Pending approval, pending review, pending. But enforcement wasn't pending. That was when I understood. This wasn't about rules. It was about control and fear. From there, everything escalated. Signs planted on my land. Survey flags appearing overnight. Inspectors trespassing. Notices stapled to my fences. Then the barn. They waited until I left town. They tore it open under a fake emergency order. Destroyed something my uncle built with his own hands. Then they towed my truck. Froze my bank account. Buried me in violations so absurd they bordered on parody. They weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to exhaust me before I ever got there. What they didn't expect was a town remembering. A store owner named Martha Hale pulled out old newspaper clippings. A retired surveyor named Caleb Dunn produced original plats proving the land was never part of the HOA. A neighbor named Walt Jensen, former sheriff, made sure I wasn't isolated. And finally, a judge saw the truth. Forged documents, false authority, abuse of power. The lien was dismissed, the enforcement voided. The HOA referred for a criminal investigation. Graham Holt walked out of that courtroom smaller than I'd ever seen him. The barn took months to rebuild. Neighbors showed up without asking. Tools, lumber, coffee, no speeches. The land grew quiet again. Not the tense quiet of fear, but the honest kind. One evening, I found a note my uncle had written years ago. If you're reading this, they tried again. He knew. And now, sitting on that same porch, I understand something he always did. Power only works when people believe they're alone. And sometimes, the quietest land tells the loudest truth. They didn't pick the wrong ranch. They picked the wrong owner.